Welcome, everybody, once again to the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast, the show where we just talk about wrestling because that's what I dream about doing every single night when I go to bed. I am Griff from GA, and joining me today is Dan from Pro Wrestling Musings and the creator of Pro Wrestling Musings, the heartbreak kid of tremendous wrestling statistics, the prince of pro wrestling numbers, the bulldog of brilliant wrestling analysis, Craig, the creator of Pro Wrestling Musings. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. We have so much to talk about. We got AEW Dynamite, we've got Stardom, we've got a new IWGP champion, and we have this little thing called WrestleMania coming up this weekend. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. But we will begin with AEW Dynamite, and this is something that I have pointed out on my power rankings, which you can read right now over on ProWrestlingMusings.com. I've noticed that AEW tends to do their shows in kind of like 2 or 3 week chunks, you know, because they don't have constant pay-per-views to build up to. They kind of do this thing where they have 1 or 2 shows that are building up characters, and then they have another show that has all of these matches that we're excited to see. And so when it comes to that, you know, you can kind of I've seen people be kind of hot and cold on the way that they build this stuff. So this Dynamite kind of felt like they were building the big matches that we're supposed to watch next week. But there were some big things that happened, and a big development was the Inner Circle returning and an absolutely dynamite promo by Chris Jericho. So I want to start there. Dan, what did you think of the Inner Circle's returning Chris Jericho's promo?
The promo was absolutely brilliant, wasn't it? I mean, we've seen him be such a superb heel for the best part of 2 years, and to just suddenly flip that to be a brilliant babyface in one promo was just brilliant to see. And well, that did whet my appetite for the for the match against the Pinnacle. I'm sure we'll talk about the other person who gets involved in this a little bit later. But I thought his promo was absolutely superb, and just that sort of almost casual announcement of blood and guts after we've been waiting for it for God knows how long.
Exactly.
And it just feels like that's just going to be a massive match. And yeah, I say at the end of that promo, I was very much fired up for that match.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that blood and guts match, I was looking forward to it when it was Inner Circle versus the Elite, when it was supposed to happen around this time last year. And so we never got that. And I think Craig brought this up a couple weeks ago, that they seemed to be kind of teasing it. You know, every time there was a faction versus faction rivalry, they were kind of teasing, oh, maybe blood and guts. Maybe we'll do blood and guts with this. And then, like you say, on this night, they basically just were like, yeah, we're doing blood and guts. And that was it. It seemed like such a matter-of-fact thing. So, Craig, you were the one a couple weeks ago that brought up, I believe you said you wouldn't believe that we'd get a blood and guts match until you actually see it. So now that it seems like we're going to see it, have they done enough to make you interested?
That's like quite a kind way of putting across that I think I mocked somebody for saying, oh, it'll be blood and guts, because they've been like every podcast you listen to, every time there's some kind of gang warfare in AEW in recent months, it's like, we're going to get blood and guts at Revolution, we're going to get blood and guts at blah, blah, blah. And it's just like never happened. So I think last time I was on the podcast when it was brought up, I was like, nah, it's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. It's going to be the thing that we keep bringing up, we want to see, and it'll just never happen. And next time on the podcast, it's, oh yeah, Craig, you're wrong. But there we go. That's okay. You're allowed to be wrong every now and again.
That's we forgive you for that. We forgive you for that. But are you excited for the possibility of, or the reality that we're going to get blood and guts in this particular feud?
Yes. I'm excited and a little bit disappointed. The original version of Blood and Guts was going to have Kenny Omega, Nick Jackson in it, which was very exciting. And it'll still be good. I think there'll be less high flying and it'll be more grisly. I think it was always going to be grisly. Yeah. But now I think you've got guys that are perhaps more true to the origins of the match. Mm-hmm. Like you're still going to get what the Inner Circle were going to bring. Sammy Guevara will perhaps stand in for Nick Jackson, and the rest of the guys within the inner circle are just really great wrestlers. But then you're bringing in FTR and MJF, who are going to be, your four horsemen kind of guys. It's going to be Grizzly. It's going to be, quite mean and spiteful. Then you've got Wardlow, who's going to throw someone around. So it's still going to be really, really good. It's just I preferred the original version of it.
Okay.
Which casts a slight shadow, but it's tantalizing. It's been like over a year now, so I think everyone's ready to see it.
So I want to open this question up then, and we'll start with Craig. At this time last year, when we were thinking about Blood and Guts, and we were thinking it was going to be originally what we were going to get, obviously Inner Circle versus the Elite, the idea of the cinematic match had not even entered anyone's consciousness. That has been obviously a pandemic invention. So now that kind of thing is on the table, do you think, and again starting with Craig, that it's possible we could get kind of a cinematic blend here, like a darker, like you said, more grisly version of Stadium Stampede, or are they going to give us a straight up War Game style match? And which would you prefer to see at this point?
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I don't think that'll be the case. I think because of where this match came from and the kind of lore behind it, the NXT War Games feels quite far away from the kind of, I've never seen one, but I've seen the NXT version, but the tales of the old NWA, WCW ones with the Horsemen and Dusty Rhodes and all those guys.
Right.
But I think people are going to assume that this match is going to be very alike that, because AEW has made very deliberate links to the past. They've brought the old guys in. They're literally on the screen. And if they, which is essentially an old-fashioned style War Games match, I think we're all expecting, and they turn it into something sports entertainment or something that's kind of away from wrestling as it's supposed to be, there's going to be a lot of backlash. And I don't know if the match, I think it's better if it's like a Cody Rhodes special kind of match, kind of gritty and somebody's going to bleed, and you've got the exact right guide in there for that MJF, FTR, Chris Jericho.
Dan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it has to go more the WCW War Games route than the NXT War Games route. Again, I don't know how many of those old War Games matches you've seen, but they brings to mind certainly the moments where Sid Vicious at the time almost killed Brian Pillman by accidentally sort of powerbombing him into the top and then the bottom of the whole contraption. And obviously Tully himself was involved in all of that as well.
Right.
Some of those matches, they're fantastic to watch, but there's not a lot of technical wrestling going on in that, and certainly not a lot of diving around. And I think that's exactly what we'll see this time. But just looking at the people involved, you say you've got someone like Sammy Guevara, but other than that, I'm not sure that we're going to see Chris Jericho doing a 360 off the top of the cage, for example, or Sean Spears, doing the Io Shirai getting in a bin sort of thing. So I think we are definitely moving more towards that WCW version, and I think that fits the feud more as well. Actually, I think that's better. And sort of going back to what you were saying about the cinematic side of this, I suppose that was the one benefit of us having to wait for so long for Blood and Guts. It means that we did get the Stadium Stampede match in the meantime,
right?
Which was superb. But I don't think that sort of comedy, slightly sort of cinematic approach would work for this feud at this point.
Well, I absolutely agree with you. And what I thought was interesting was a lot of these, obviously the Inner Circle were the guys involved in the Stadium Stampede, and so many people and pretty much everyone here at Pro Wrestling Musings loved that match. I have not heard a bad word about it from anyone here. And to me, it's funny that not even, or about a year on from the Stadium Stampede, we're going to get another AEW creation in Blood and Guts, an AEW original kind of match. And it's going to be completely different. It's a lot of the same guys, but it is going to, I expect, I expect no comedy at all. This, I think, needs to be a very serious, very grueling and bloody match to really sell the story that's going on here. And I think that that's really good specifically for MJF, because what MJF has done so well over his run in AEW is he's like a very old school heel. He's very Ric Flair. Like, there's some things he does that are designed to get you to laugh at him and make fun of him, and that's his whole goal, and he's so good at that. But what Ric Flair also did was when he wanted to turn the switch and become a vicious, brutal heel that you actually that you just hated with every fiber of your being, he could turn that switch and suddenly the comedy was gone. And Chris Jericho did that specifically in WWE, his feud with Kevin Owens, when he flipped that switch and suddenly he was this vicious heel. And MJF, this is his time to become to show that he has that comedy, but he can also become that heel that everyone hates, that there's just not a single part of him that you like at all. This is the time to do it in a match that will be presumably as bloody and as violent as this one's going to be.
Yeah, I think we're seeing MJF take a lot of that blood as well. I think MJF is going to be caked in blood by the end of this, whichever way it goes. I think he's going to be the one who epitomizes the blood and guts element of this.
They've got a bit of work to do to get there, though, because I was concerned. So last week's beatdown, I thought had slight hints of comedy around it. The fact that they were hiding out in the bathroom, the sticking of MJF's head down the toilet, the way that Chris Jericho switched the signs at the end. I don't know. It was a little. I don't know. It was just a little bit too on the edge of not being serious enough for me.
I guess I understand that. I said last week on the podcast, I really loved the visual of the Inner Circle just standing there in the bathroom, and MJF goes, he's like, the stench is unbearable, and he opens the door, and it's just the Inner Circle standing there. I loved that visual, so I come down on it like everyone involved in this match, all 10 guys or 11 guys, however many there are, all of them have done comedy in the past. They've mixed in comedy. I guess with the exception of FTR, they've been very serious since they got back, which is fine. But everyone else, they've been doing comedy at times. And so I like funny things being blended into wrestling. I'm not as hardline on having no comedy, but you're absolutely right. If we're going to get a match that is as violent as this one promises to be, eventually that comedy needs to stop. And eventually we need to turn the gear into completely serious. Like, this is going to be the most serious storyline going on in the company, because this blood and guts match is going to be the most serious match in the company. You can't have blood and guts and then after that have like Kenny Omega versus John Moxley or something. Like, that's not how that's going to work. You have to have blood and guts main event, so it has to be the most serious match in the company at the time. So I agree with you. There's a point where that comedy, they're going to have to drop that to get into the much more serious stuff. And I think that it's possible we may have seen that done this time on this week of Dynamite. Now, obviously, the inclusion of Mike Tyson has been very controversial for a number of reasons. I think the one that's most wrestling related is the fact that it seems pretty obvious that Tyson was involved just to counter program with NXT, because obviously their first night of TakeOver was the same night as Dynamite, so it seemed, pretty much like we need Tyson to try to compete with this. And some people were saying there was a lot of argument about, does that actually help anything? They didn't announce it last week on Dynamite, so how many people are actually going to see it? How much does that mean anything? And also the idea that Mike Tyson now suddenly is aligned with the Inner Circle, when the last time we saw him on Dynamite, he and the Inner Circle were having this face-off. So to me, I think when Tyson was on screen, they put him over really well. And Tyson, he looks great. I mean, this guy, credit to him, he has stayed in shape. He still looks like a killer. And so that was a pleasant surprise, that he still looked dangerous. And him getting Shawn Spears in the corner, I was genuinely afraid for Shawn Spears in that moment, which that's the point. That's what they wanted me to feel. So I left that as better than his last involvement on Dynamite. Much better than the last time we saw him on Dynamite. This one made sense, and I enjoyed it. So where do you guys come down on the Tyson involvement, and does it lend any heat to this angle that is eventually going to culminate in blood and guts? We'll start with Dan.
So, well, firstly, I don't think we can ignore the non-wrestling elements of it, and not to go into too much detail. To me, it feels like a really bad time off the back of the speaking out allegations and movement to have someone with Tyson's history involved at all. It makes you think about things like that you shouldn't really be attaching to your pro wrestling anyway. And particularly now he's supposed to be on the babyface side. It just creates all of those conversations in your own mind and between people, which I don't think they needed to do. Personally, for me, so I agree that he looked great. I think I said on Twitter, if it had been any other boxer in the world almost, it would have been a brilliant segment. The way he came in and destroyed them, it would have been great.
Later on, we'll talk about another boxer that is involved in Dynamite.
But I don't buy the sudden change of allegiance either. That doesn't really make any sense. Mm-hmm. And I think that's my, away from the moral side of it, I actually just don't think it makes sense in the storyline at all. Yeah. And also, it's 2 weeks in, 3 weeks into the Pinnacle having been created, and they've been made to look very stupid 2 weeks in a row. Effectively 5 of them ran away from one person. Fine, it's Mike Tyson, but they still ran away from one person. I'm just not sure it's really helped the storyline at all. And when you see his name flash up to be involved in the singles match next week, for me personally, it doesn't do anything at all. In fact, it makes me look forward to that match less because of his involvement.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm not disagreeing with anything you said there. Craig?
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm a little bit fed up of having to talk about such major issues around this silly wrestling thing that I watch. And I don't mean that to kind of curtail the conversation. Like, it's just frustrating that, you have to kind of feel bad or question yourself about this thing that you just want to enjoy. I've enough about the Mike Tyson situation either. I don't know, like I have a vague understanding of what he did in the past. I'm not a punishment and never to be seen again kind of thinker. I'm very much along the lines of rehabilitation, but that has to happen, and it has to happen effectively in a system that works. I think kind of criminal systems around the world are perhaps not doing that job properly, and that's why people get so upset and angry and take to Twitter. So you can't blame the people that don't like it. I don't want to see him because I kind of get the impression that first off, it feels grabby, and I struggle to trust these kind of wrestling companies, and kind of when things are motivated by money, I struggle to believe that they have ethical, community-based kind of motivations. Whether or not it actually helps, apparently by the ratings it doesn't. And I don't know. I'd be really excited to see Dax Harwood versus, who's he against? Sammy Guevara?
No, Jericho with Guevara in his corner.
Okay. Yeah. Dax Harwood was unreal against Jungle Boy. That's one of my favorite matches of the year. That's enough for me. I don't need the random boxer kind of taking some of the limelight.
I definitely understand that. One of our writers at Pro Wrestling Musings, he brought up that Ryan Garcia, if you're going to get a boxer, and I'm a huge boxing fan, if you're going to get a guy, then it should be Ryan Garcia. And you know what? It's for any of you who are familiar with Ryan Garcia.
Tyson's from like 20 years ago kind of thinking.
Yeah, exactly. It was more along the lines of, Tyson's just old. And Garcia is one of the biggest names in boxing right now. So if you want to get that involvement, then it would work, and it would be even better than, for example, Floyd Mayweather getting involved in WWE, because even though Mayweather's a big name, his style is not that fun to watch, whereas Garcia is very fun to watch.
When was the famous Tyson and Austin call? That must have been years ago.
Well, that was
98, I think.
98, yeah.
98. Okay. Yeah. Well, I suppose that's another comparison, isn't it? The thing that you bring up about Garcia is great, but like Garcia's maybe who Tyson was in 98.
Well, and the thing is, it not even that, because the problem with Garcia is the fact that he is not a heavyweight. And when he goes out there, we just have a video about this over on our YouTube channel. You can go watch it on Pro Wrestling Musings, where we talk about the shoot fighter gimmick. And that one in relation to Ty Conti, who we'll get to later. But it's really hard to make a shoot fighter gimmick work. And it's even harder if you don't create that suspension of disbelief. And the problem with Garcia is if he walks out there and he's smaller than everyone, then in the world of professional wrestling in kayfabe, you're like, this guy's going to get killed out there. The advantage to having Mike Tyson is he is still so big that he still has that intimidation factor. And so even involving someone like Garcia, who I am a huge fan of, it's still difficult to make that work. So for me, if you wanted to have a current boxer without the baggage of Mike Tyson come in and perform that role, then to me, you should have gotten one of Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua, or Tyson Fury. Mm-hmm. You should have gotten one of those three guys. A current heavyweight, all of them have been champion. Deontay Wilder, probably don't go with him because he's a natural heel. Like he's a heel in real life. He once said he wants to kill a guy in the ring. So maybe don't go with him if he's going to be a babyface. But like Tyson Fury is a babyface. Like he has such a great story.
Depends.
In terms of his story, in terms of like what people know about him, what you can market him as, that like what I'm saying is there are heavyweights today that would have filled that role, I think, better than Tyson. The problem is that when Tyson was boxing, he was the biggest star on the planet in any sport. It was like Michael Jordan and Mike Tyson. Like those are your biggest stars in the world. And now, the issue is that boxing has kind of taken a step down, ironically, kind of because of Mike Tyson. So now the biggest stars... Go ahead.
What's your guy? Khabib Nura.
Khabib Nurmagomedov.
Yeah, and has UFC perhaps? Well, yeah, but maybe UFC is now more in the position that boxing was in 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's definitely true. It seems like UFC is the ascendant. But it could be, we could be seeing kind of a flip, because think about 20 years ago, Ken Shamrock was the guy who came into the WWF, and he was from this new burgeoning sport called mixed martial arts that really no one had heard of, and it was just starting to get bigger. In fact, MMA was too violent for almost anyone to put on TV at the time. And Ken Shamrock comes in, having been in the first UFC event, and he's getting this push in WWF. We could see potentially the reverse if you were to take a boxer. And boxing is now on the ascendant after UFC really dominated all of combat sports for a long time. Now boxing is starting to get bigger on the backs of several big stars. So to me, you could take any of them. You could take any of those three heavyweights I mentioned. Maybe Canelo Alvarez. I mean, he probably costs a lot because he's a massive star, but you could get him as well if you really wanted. You could get Garcia. I mean, there's a lot of names that you could get. I'm a big fan of Devin Haney. You could have got him. Badu Jack, he's a champion right now. Like, there's names that you could get, is what I'm saying. So my issue is not with Tyson or the idea of having Tyson be there. My issue more is, does Tyson need to be the guy? I would have chosen someone more current, but I understand Tyson's a big name. A lot of people, like it or not, a lot of people do like him. And so that's a guy who's going to, presumably, that was AEW's hope, was that he was going to draw ratings and sell tickets to Daly's Place and, whatever the case may be. I think you could have chosen someone different. However, what we did have in terms of boxing, and I promise we will get to some of the numbers here. There's some numbers I really want to discuss, but we are on the topic of boxers, so I can't not talk about this. QT Marshall's new faction cuts their first promo. And we talked about last week when we had Anthony and Sergi, they both thought that Nick Camarado was the breakout star when this group formed, when they turned on the Rhodeses, and they did all that kind of stuff. I said that Anthony Ogogo will be the biggest star to come out of this, and I think after this promo, I think I'm right. Anthony Ogogo cut such a phenomenal promo in this segment for me, and it was so good. Like, he's so charismatic, and we're going to get to see him make his debut next week on Dynamite. So I got to ask you guys, we didn't talk to you last week, but now a week on or 2 weeks on, what do you think of QT Marshall's new group, and are you excited to see Anthony Ogogo make his debut next week? Craig, we'll start with you.
Very excited. Yeah, I like the idea of different styles in wrestling is cool. So him going in there as a boxer, that's great. He looked great with that one punch to Cody, where he kind of took his time and undid his cufflinks and his watch and whatever. I thought he was wonderfully charismatic. Why he's kind of dragging the three Americans that's in the ring with him when he said something Yanks or disgusting Americans or something. Well,
I believe the line was, "This isn't Great Britain, this is shitty America," which is it's so corny, and I'm American. I loved it because he's the heel. It reminds me of William Regal, just putting down America for no reason. It's hilarious to me.
Yeah, which I think is a cool heel move. It was more the other three kind of just standing there yeah, whatever, cool, okay. But maybe that's he's a star and they have to. But yeah, I think I'm really interested to see him. Very, very so.
Dan?
Yeah, he does look like a star so far. Again, this week they trusted him with the words in the promo, whereas on solo and didn't get anything, and Nick Camarato got to throw some paint to the wall. Well, near a wall, he just about made it. But he's the one who looks the most sort of threatening of those three, certainly. And the fact again that they're giving him ring time next week suggests that they think he's ready. It's an interesting one to see someone come onto Dynamite who I don't think anyone's seen very much of him at all. I don't even know if he's been on Dark so far, other than as a commentator. Certainly haven't seen a lot of.
I don't think he has, actually. I'm gonna look this up real fast while you're talking, but I don't think he's had a professional match.
No, I'm not sure he has either, and that puts a lot of trust in him, and you'd hope that that's well placed trust rather than just, again, he's a boxer, let's put him on. But certainly in terms of his charisma so far and his presence, he looks like he can carry that. And I think just a quick word for QT Marshall as well, who I thought that promo was superb. Before we got to Ogogo, I thought, for someone who has been really on the fringes of AEW generally, and the Cody's friend bit has very much been how he's been portrayed so far, and just the little bits in there that he put in around about Cody's history, etc., etc. I thought it was superbly done, and I hope he can sort of carry it through onto a live mic, because obviously that was a pre-taped one, but I hope he can carry that through in the next couple of weeks. And I think this is a really good sort of mid-card feud that gives. There's loads of individual matches that we can get off of it. There's storyline things that we can get. I think it's a really good way of using some of the mid-card.
Yeah, I definitely.
I really enjoyed the doing the work line. He said was Cody says do the work, but it's actually get QT to do the work. I quite like that.
Yeah, I agree. I did just look it up, by the way. Anthony Ogogo has never had a professional wrestling match in his entire life. So thinking about putting him into his first ever pro wrestling match in front of a live audience on national TV on the first night that they will not have NXT competing with them. So presumably they're going to have one of their biggest audiences ever. I mean, that seems to be the talk. And that's when you're going to give Anthony Ogogo his debut. To me, this is AEW pretty much saying this is a guy that you are going to that is going to be a big star in this company. And I think when you present this group against Cody Rhodes and the Nightmare Family, Cody Rhodes stands out as the biggest star from the Nightmare Family, from that whole group of people. He's the guy that presumably the biggest star in QT's group is going to beat in order to, catapult them into the upper mid to main event scene. And if it's going to be Anthony Ogogo, then to me, I think I can't wait to see Ogogo work with Cody Rhodes. And look, if it is Camarado, I can't wait to see that either. There's so much about this group that I really, really like, and I can't exactly put my finger on it, but every time I see them, every time I've now seen them, their turn and their promo this week, I've seen this promo like 10 times. I went back and watched it. Like, there's something about this group that just really connects with me that I really, really like. And I don't know if it's Ogogo. I don't know if it's the fact that Camarado is still silent, but we know what he can do. I don't know if it's the fact that we don't know anything about Solo, but they keep talking about him, and so it's like I don't know about this guy. Like, I don't know what it is, but there's something about this group that I really, really like.
Yeah, absolutely, and I feel a very kindred spirit with him as well. Going back to the start of this podcast, if you listen to my intro and to Craig's intro, then you're I'm definitely the QT Marshall of this particular podcast.
I wasn't even thinking about it like that, but you know what? You make a point. You do make a point.
Hey, absolutely nothing.
Well, all right. Well, let's get in more of into our element here, and we'll talk about some pro wrestling statistics. And I want to start out a match that really stood out to me was the opener tonight, or on Dynamite rather, Hangman Page against Max Caster. I think the Acclaimed have done a phenomenal job of getting themselves over by just playing their characters and just drawing eyes onto them. Like, when they first debuted, I was like, okay, this is a team, like, they're trying a gimmick and it's fine, but I didn't really think much of it. And now whenever Max Caster grabs that mic, my eyes are glued to the screen. I think he's phenomenal. I think they've done a great job really establishing themselves. And this match, especially from a statistical perspective, to me, shows the way forward for what Hangman Page should be. I've said before that I was a huge fan of Page at the beginning. I actually was an early believer that he should have been the first world champion. I'm glad I was proven wrong, that Jericho was phenomenal in that role. But I loved Hangman Page, and since then I have kind of lost my connection with him. But this match, to me, going forward, kind of shows what he should be. Lots of strikes, a very dangerous striker. 8 of his 36 strikes were strike downs. I mean, it's a higher percentage than most in AEW. He spent 55% of that match on offense. So he was in control a lot of that match. And the only thing that, got the heat off of him, that got the heat onto Caster, was Anthony Bowen's involvement by cheating. And to me, that is exactly what Hangman Page should be. When he worked, it was because he was this badass cowboy that nobody could touch. And the only way you could beat him was to cheat. And that, I think, should be the case going forward. What did you guys think of this opening match? We'll start with Dan.
Yeah, I completely agree about the Acclaimed, by the way. I think I was really unsure about them when they started, but actually they've really grown into that role as the sort of, noisy heels, I suppose, is a good way of describing it.
That's a great way to describe it.
And I do now. I look forward to those raps at the start of their entrance every time, and it was a particularly good one this week as well.
Yes,
I actually wasn't so sold on this match particularly, but I do like the sort of. I agree completely that they're sort of putting this thing that Hangman can only be beaten by the cheating, and the Acclaimed do that very well here. But I just feel like we haven't actually seen the best of Hangman Page for a while now. I feel like we do need a big performance from him, and not through his own doing, I suspect. Caster's obviously relatively new. The last big match I can think of was the Matt Hardy match, which was, Matt Hardy's obviously limited in the fact that he has no bones anymore, effectively. So,
right.
I would like to see Page in a really sort of a good one of those opening matches that on Dynamite, which really gives him sort of 15-20 minutes just to show everything he can do.
Mm-hmm. Craig, what were your thoughts on this?
This wasn't quite that match, but it was still good, and it did still put him across. It's that sort of that baby face, which I really like.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. Craig, what did you think?
So I'm going to talk a little bit about Adam Page. So in this match, it's really interesting. Adam Page continuing to get strike downs, 8 out of 36, so 22% strike down range, which is pretty good. 0 submission time. So after 2020, I kind of compiled all the numbers and came up with the difference between winners and losers in AEW. Mm-hmm. And in the male division, In the male division, winners tend to use their finishers more than losers. That's no surprise to anyone.
Makes
Taunts
sense.
more than losers. That's interesting. The big thing that they do more than losers is submission time, which you'll notice in this match Adam Page had absolutely zero of. And the other two things is strike downs and grapples. In 2021, Adam Page is using very, very little grapple time. Before this match and his other four, he'd used on average 5 seconds of submission time per hour. That's like nothing. However, he's using strike downs more than anybody who has wrestled as much as him. And in terms of grapples, he's pretty average. So on the one hand, he's heavy hitting. However, he's not using submission. So when we're looking at kind of like their booking patterns, their in-ring, obviously he's winning matches. It appears the link that AEW are making for him is he's a hard hitter, and that's why he's winning the matches. And yeah, that was my statistical nugget for that match.
Well, it makes a lot of sense, and when you look at the way that he wrestles, it's really believable. So what wouldn't be believable is if he is like a mat-based wrestler, like a Cody Rhodes style technical mat-based guy, and then his finisher is a lariat. Like that wouldn't make any sense. But when you look at the history of guys who use lariats as finishers, specifically guys like Stan Hansen and JBL, these are not guys that are going to engage with you in an amateur wrestling style match. And Hangman doesn't do it. I mean, he's competent when it comes to doing that. So you can't beat him. But that's not how he's going to beat you. He's going to beat you by knocking you out and then putting you away with that lariat. And I think it totally works for the style that you're asking me to believe that he has. To me, it's just more example of AEW putting together a wrestler that makes sense. His wrestling makes sense the way that he does it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The other thing there, talking about the finisher as well, only just thinking about this, but that lariat is becoming one of the most protected finishers in AEW, building into presumably a match against the guy with the most protected finisher.
Yep.
It's great too.
So
It's a really
there is certainly a story being told there.
Yep.
and it's a really flashy move as well, because before AEW he didn't use that as his finisher. It was like a secondary move.
Yeah, that's true. When he got in, the Deadeye was his finisher, which now the two have basically reversed. Which, I mean, at first I preferred the Deadeye to the Buckshot Lariat, but now that they've really put the Buckshot Lariat over, I've gotten used to the change. I still think the Deadeye is a really cool looking move, and it looks it would look more impactful for basically anyone else, because it's like a reverse pile driver, and by definition, pile drivers look more impactful than strikes. But the way that they've put over the Buckshot Lariat has really got me to forget that the Deadeye used to be the finisher, and now I'm like, oh, Buckshot Lariat match is over. And I definitely agree with Dan. The most protected finisher in the entire world of wrestling is the One-Winged Angel, and we're looking at a match between one of them, basically the two most protected finishers in AEW, which presumably will lead to someone kicking out of the other one. It may not, but that's what I assume it will lead to. Now, when it comes to Hangman Page being the guy, I've kind of been a little hesitant to get on that bandwagon, mostly because his character, like, it doesn't so much... I understand why it works for a lot of people. It doesn't work for me as much, because if you are going to be the guy who conquers Kenny Omega, to me, you should have no weaknesses on the outside. You should have no chinks in the armor. And so Hangman Page, his character is like a normal person, and he has flaws like normal people, which is totally cool. But if you're going to be the guy, then I want Page to be a total badass. I want Omega, I want the Elite or the Bullet Club now to get nothing on Hangman Page ever. Like, he's just untouchable, and he's like this, like a cool cowboy. He's like, I want him to be like Clint Eastwood. That's who I want my cowboy character to be. Can you guys? Do you agree with me, or can you persuade me out of thinking like that and liking Hangman Page better?
Yes.
So I agree. I think he's not on the end of that upswing yet.
Okay.
So which is why it's slightly odd that he's being sort of touted as the number one contender already, because it feels like he hasn't come back. Obviously, went so low as he did, and he's had a couple of good wins. But I completely agree with you that he needs to be the absolute best to be going up against this Kenny Omega. And at the moment, I don't think the story has said he's there yet. He was messing around with the Dark Order on a lawnmower 3 weeks ago, which was great, and I absolutely loved that. I think there needs to be a bit more progression from there, and that's what I mean in terms of, sort of those matches. So whether we have him against Gallows and Anderson in the coming months, get a great match against one of those two, and perhaps matches against either of the Bucks. Those are the matches that perhaps give him that more infallible look that I think he needs to then go up against Kenny Omega.
Yep.
I would really agree with that, and I think that's maybe an issue with AEW's booking in that they try to protect matches to a fault. So, like, when guys are racking up these win-loss records, they're often doing it on Dark, or they're beating Max Caster and Cesar Bononi. I don't know if the way the question was framed means this, but I don't want him to be like John Wayne. I really like that Adam Page in particular seems to be trying to tell stories that kind of invite in more kind of real life kind of stuff. Like, he's kind of almost had like an emotional breakdown in his storyline. And yeah, I'm quite intrigued to see what they do with his card. I'm kind of okay with seeing him being pervious, like him perhaps losing another big match before he gets to Kenny Omega, or him having weaknesses that he's having to overcome, or maybe more accurately put, like, manage, rather than like I don't, for me and for how I've perhaps, I don't know, grown up, for lack of a better phrase, I don't want that kind of John Wayne cowboy figure that kind of perpetuates toxic masculinity. Not to go quite a bit too with the heavy phrases, and I don't mean to be too kind of harshly contrarian with that, but like, I'm kind of fine with being a flawed hero, if that makes sense.
I think there's a lot of people that feel that way about Paige, and that's why it's really connected with them. The first time that we mentioned Paige on this podcast, I was talking to Anthony, I think it was in our first episode, and I said that for me, his development kind of reminds a lot of people of themselves, because specifically when you are coming out of high school, for Americans, when you're coming out of high school and you're going to college, there's this I don't know if this exists in Great Britain, but at least in America, there's this idea that, college is like the best time of your life. And so you get to drink and you get to party and do all this kind of stuff. And that realization that that's not how necessarily it goes, that actually there's a lot more difficult things that come into your life when you start to get older and mature. That's the story that Hangman kind of goes with. And so for a lot of people, that does really stick, in the fact that he drinks a lot, and that's like, that sticks for a lot of people. But I said to Anthony, for me, none of that sticks, because that wasn't my experience going to college, and I don't drink personally. So like, for me, none of it works. What worked was him being a badass cowboy. That works for me. But, I for people who empathize with Hangman Page's story, it really works for them. So I think this is one of those where, sometimes stories connect, sometimes it doesn't. I'm nowhere near the point where I'll like turn off the TV if I see Hangman Page, and if they made him the world champion tomorrow, I still wouldn't turn off the TV. It's not near that bad. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying, for me personally, there is a different style of telling the story that would work better. But it sounds like for Craig, this style works great, and they don't need to change it. So I think it's one of those, beauty is in the eye of the beholder kind of things. And so if you out there, if this works for you, if this works great for you, or if you feel like they could be doing this better, then, find us on Twitter or, drop a comment if you're watching on YouTube, whatever the case may be. And let us know what you think of this story. Cause I do think that well-intentioned people can disagree on this. And the point is, AEW allows these stories to be told in such a way that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Not every wrestling story works with everyone. That's just kind of how it works.
And also, I think that they can tell almost both stories at the same time to start with, and then maybe come down on one side towards the end. So keep both of those sort of groups of people engaged in it, because we have seen him be that cowboy, that perfect cowboy. Certainly back in New Japan. But now we've got that more sort of haunted character as well. I think we will see a lot of that in the storyline. I think we will see Don Callis offering him lots of beer and vodka, etc., etc. I think that we will see. We'll see all of that as we go forward. It'll be interesting to see where they then land on. Assuming they do give him the title, does he then become the sort of the perfect character, or is he still flawed? It's a tricky one to keep telling the flawed person story,
right,
without it becoming a bit repetitive. That's the only issue there.
Yeah,
they've still got a lot of mileage in it, I think, at the moment.
That's exactly what I was going to bring up. Like, eventually, if he's challenging for the world championship, if we see every week him doing that 1,000-mile stare, and he's like, I don't know if I should go back and join Kenny Omega and everything. Like, if you do that every week while he's chasing the world championship, that is when you will lose me, because now I'm like, okay, do you want the world title or not? Like, to me, the world title should be your biggest prize. If you don't want it, then become a heel, align yourself with the world champion, and be done with it. I don't want them to tease this whole will he, won't he for very long. So in that situation, I want the second or third time that Callis comes up and offers him a beer or something, like they're in a bar and Callis buys him a drink. That I want that to be the moment. Like, Paige just cracks him over the skull with a beer bottle and we're done. We've got babyface Hangman Page. He's a badass. He's unbeatable, going up against Kenny Omega, who has been the most unbeatable force in wrestling for a long, long time now. That's the story I want to see told. However, my mind is open if they are going to go in a different direction with that whole thing. We've been spending a lot of time on Dynamite, so before we move on to the other things that we want to talk about, I want to turn it over to both of you guys. We'll start with Craig. Is there any other match, looking at the statistics, that really stood out to you that you want to talk about?
I'm going to rattle through the main event very quickly, because it's got some quite good bits to it. So you've got Moxley and the Bucks versus Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers. They were very close in terms of strikes, 51-42 in favor of the faces, kind of maybe with quotation marks now with everything we know. The babyface team also got 16 strike downs, 10 grapples, and 11 dives. So they're hitting double figures for all of the kind of heavy offense, with the heels coming in at 10, 5, and 0. The heels did have a submission advantage, 38 compared to 20 seconds. However, what's really interesting is the 30 reversals compared to 14, again in favor of the babyface team. 8 tags each, 4 double teams compared to 1, again for the babyface team. Babyface team, 60% of the offense, 31% strike down rate, 37% reversal rate compared to 40%, 24%, 15%. It's a bit of a whitewash statistically for the babyface team. Mm-hmm. If you head over to ProWrestlingMusings.com and you check out the AEW 07/04/21 match stats, yes, British date and month, sorry Americans, but you're wrong. There's even a 3 minutes per 3 minutes graph to kind of show how much offense each of the teams got per 3 minutes of the match, and that's an even starker kind of favor of the face team, because this is weighted, so I give more points to grapples and more points to dives. So, the match looks incredibly, controlled by the babyface team. And I would just like to highlight, from minutes kind of 2 to 14 of this 7-minute match, I thought it was excellent. It really gripped me. It was in the same vein as the other 6-man matches that they've been doing over the last few weeks. But yeah, I was one of those guys that I thought the kind of histrionics and the overacting was too much. I've seen Matt Jackson do this better. Matt Jackson's role in the Golden Lovers Young Bucks tag team match from New Japan a few years back, he's tremendous in that match. He's like full of fire and emotion, and it's believable, and it's fiery, it's angry, it comes across really well. Whereas here it was just all kind of, a bit kind of Twilight, to be honest with you. And I enjoy watching a Twilight movie. It's just, it was kind of grating in the context of just this match and seeing him next to Jon Moxley, who's just like not having any of it.
Yeah, that to me really, that's what I enjoyed, was the fact that Moxley's character was believable. Like, it to me, Moxley, we know, is a guy who will go in 5-on-1 and still, try to get a body, because that's what he does. So for him to just push him out of the way and hit 2 Death Riders and then put Kenny in the choke, like, that was believable. And I totally agree with you. What I didn't like was the whole Bucks thing, and the reason why, I think, like, Matt Jackson, he overacts, and he did it in that Bucks Golden Lovers match as well. We know that that's kind of what he does, and it works for some people, it doesn't work for others. To me, what would have worked better is if they hadn't been doing this for 4 months. Like, this has been the Bucks character for months now. That they're like, oh, are they babyface? Are they heel? And then they super kicked Marvez, and like they break his phone, and you're like, okay, thank God, they're heel. We know they're heel. And then 2 weeks later, they're babyface again, and you're like, what the hell is going on? To me, that's what made this not work. It's not so much the acting; it's because I couldn't help but see, Bullet Club at the end, and they're doing the hug, and I'm like, are the Bucks going to be babyface in 2 weeks? Like, are they going to be? I cannot get involved with this, because they've been teasing me about this for months now. That's what didn't work for me.
If they're full heel next week, then I think all is forgiven. If there's any continuation of this conflicted Young Bucks stuff, it's gonna go down like a lead balloon.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah,
I will completely turn off of it if they're still doing this whole storyline.
You'll have to add a new stat, Craig, which is seconds of internal conflict during that.
It was a long time. It was a long time.
It was, wasn't it? and 3 or 4 times as well.
I have a timer on my phone so that I can time so I know how long the submissions go. So the timer just runs throughout the whole match. And like, it was he was doing it for like, it was at least the first minute of the match, and then like the match essentially stops around, I don't know, 15 and a half minutes, 16 minutes, and it goes for another at least 56 seconds of just like Matt Jackson, like, am I going to kick him? I'm going to kick him. Or am I going to kick him? And Nick's role in it all is a bit weird as well. Like, Don Callis telling him to hit the bricks so he can talk to Matt. And then at the start of this match, Matt's really kind of conflicted, and Nick just wants to do the wrestling. At the end of the match, Nick's ready to kick Kenny Omega, and then he's going to kick Moxley, and he's I don't know, he's like, Matt's overacting, and Nick is just like randomly doing stuff and following his brother's lead.
Nick is almost underselling the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Which was particularly weird when he was then very keen to kick Moxley at the end. Which it feels like they're telling the story with sort of half the pages missing a lot of the time. They're not telling us what they think is going on. Almost, perhaps they just think it's a bit too clever for their own good. Well, I'm not quite sure, but
there is one way that I would feel more connected with this. So if the story was Matt Jackson is kind of he's like the emotional leader of the Bucks. He's the older brother, and so he kind of makes the decisions. And Nick Jackson's character is he just wants to hurt people. Like he loves wrestling, he loves violence. And so whatever Matt tells him to do, he just does, because that's what he loves to do. If Nick Jackson couldn't care less about who he's kicking, he just wants to kick some people. That story would work.
Do you know what? They've done this before in AEW. Is that not the plot of the Revolution match? Did Nick Jackson not? I'm sure there's a bit of that match where Matt's conflicted and Nick Jackson kind of shoves him or whatever, and then they hit the move.
Yeah, you're talking
It was definitely Matt who did
Revolution
all the,
2020.
Yes. Sorry, I wasn't clear about that, but yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely Matt who did all the conflict on that one as well, I think.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely
Yeah.
right. You're absolutely right. So I guess if they had just been more obvious, like if we had actually seen conversations between the Bucks where Nick just said, "Dude, I don't care what you do. I just want to kick people," or whatever the case is. If we had seen that, then this might actually work better for me, because then I'd believe that Nick is just kind of waiting for Matt to make a decision, and whatever Matt was going to do, Nick was going to do just because he likes putting his boot in someone's jaw. That would have worked for me a little bit better. And you know what? Here's the thing. Maybe that has happened. Maybe on Being the Elite, they've actually kind of sold that. The problem is, I don't watch Being the Elite, and this goes back to an old criticism of AEW, whether they have or not. There's a lot of character work being done, and in order for character work to be done, you need screen time. And on a 2-hour TV show, there isn't enough time. So they do a lot of character on Being the Elite. They do a lot of stuff. And an old criticism of AEW is that people felt like they had to watch all of this other stuff in order to get what was going on. And I actually saw this criticism from Matthew, the guy who does Botchamania, who basically said, I didn't watch New Japan 7 years ago, so I don't know anything about Bullet Club, Young Bucks, and all this history and stuff, so I don't care about the story, because it's referencing all these things that I don't know. That is a criticism of AEW that's been around for a long time, and it doesn't bother me as much, because I love Bullet Club. I'm a total mark for Bullet Club, so it's fine with me. But I do understand that if you don't know this story, if you don't know the history of Bullet Club and the history of Bucks and the Golden Lovers and, all this kind of stuff, like, you wouldn't know anything that's going on. None of this would make sense to you. And I totally understand why you wouldn't be connected with this story. I'm not connected with this story, and I know what's going on.
Well, I was going to agree with that point there. I think that's kind. I think that's kind. Like, I've seen every episode of Being the Elite, I think. And like I didn't like this either. It wasn't good.
It's particularly an issue when earlier in the show you had Pac and Phoenix and the best friends, and that just felt like a segment that wasn't needed at all. Like, maybe use that to do some of the Young Bucks story beats. Like there was I think a general criticism of Dynamite this week was that they tried to fit in far too much into 2 hours. And that was the example.
People.
Yes, I saw that. 72
people were on the show. That's crazy.
Man.
72 wrestlers were either wrestling or like interviewed or around the ring.
Yeah, that's a little too much for a 2-hour TV program. Even one that I think it seemed like they had fewer commercial breaks. I think probably to compete with NXT. But yeah, that's a little too much. And that whole best friends and Death Triangle thing, I understand that it's a 3-on-3 feud. And look, I want to see Chris Statlander back on TV as much as the next guy. I love Chris Statlander. But it kind of like, you just announced that Death Triangle is going to be fighting for the tag team titles next week, and you don't have them confronting the champions that they're going to be facing for those belts. Like, could you possibly send a clearer message that they're not going to win next week? You know what I mean?
That was my concern. It really felt like it undermined that match next week by doing that. This is a take from What Culture's podcast, so certainly not my own. But they're saying it's fine to build to things in 6 months' time, but not at the expense of booking the show next week. Like,
I think that's
we're going into what should be one of the best matches you'll ever like to see: the Young Bucks versus Pac and Phoenix, with absolutely no story in it at all. So
that's the bizarre thing.
So good.
Yeah,
exactly. That's the bizarre thing with this match. I don't need any bit. Literally, the build could have been for 4 weeks. You just tell me. You give me 10 seconds. Bucks versus Pac and Phoenix will happen in a month. Bucks versus Pac and Phoenix will happen in 3 weeks. If that is the only build, that's still like my most anticipated match of almost any show that's ever happened. Just the prospect of getting that match. This angle that suddenly Death Triangle is involved with the best friends and the Bucks are involved with the Bullet Club, it's actually made me less interested in the match because now I know who's going to win. I know that the Bucks are going to win. So it's you've done the one thing that will make me less interested in this match that I couldn't have possibly been less interested or more interested in coming into it. Now, the one thing that could save it, I will give them one more week of a total swerve. If the Bucks are going to win and Omega and Gallus and Anderson cost them the match, and then Death Triangle wins the titles. One more swerve, because the story here is the Bullet Club does not want the Bucks because the Bucks have been so like emotionally needy and they've been in their own heads, and so the Bullet Club's like, nope, we want you out of here. We're done. We don't want you. One more swerve. Bucks are babyface. You've given me unpredictability in this match. And you've got Bucks versus Gallows and Anderson, new tag team champions. They get to go feud with best friends, whatever they want to do. I don't care. Give me that. That's the one thing that I will allow in terms of this whole storyline.
Yeah, end of next week, we need to know what the Bucks are doing, one way or another.
Yes.
I think if they are still conflicted or looking like they might go one way or the other, then it will be very frustrating. So
yeah,
I think next week will be a big show in terms of that storyline.
I agree. Well,
Do you know what else is good, like Bucks and Death Triangle?
What?
Stardom.
Hey, that was a transition that I couldn't have even imagined trying to pull off. But let's talk about Stardom. They just had a big show over this past week over at Yokohama, the Dream Cinderella in spring. Don't ask me why they do names this way. I couldn't tell you, but that's how they do it. So it was a big show. Of course, a lot of the talk was about Bea Priestley after her angle in New Japan last month. She was taking on for the World of Stardom title. We had a Goddesses of Stardom title tag match to main event. Lots of good matches on this. Both you guys have watched this show. Craig, you've seen the two title matches. What did you guys think of this show overall?
So I thought it was a really good show, actually. It's a slightly strange one in that because they had a big show in March, not long ago I think that was at the Budokan. And they didn't have a lot of time to sort of build to a lot of these matches. But actually, that's I think worked in its favour in a lot of ways. It was sort of quite a quite a good fun show, to be honest, from start to finish. I think the undercard matches were good, and I thought the three title matches all delivered in their own way. Actually, I think they were superb. And I think the one thing I would criticize about is for the second big show in a row they've not had the red belt headline the event, which I think they're going to have to rectify that fairly soon, because otherwise you are going to start questioning what's the biggest belt in the promotion. But that's a sort of relatively minor quibble, I think. But I thought it was certainly in terms of the three main matches, I thought they were all brilliant and all very different in their own way as well.
Yeah, it's a big marker of how behind Julia they are, because the kind of common thread between Utami not getting to defend her red belt at the top of the show is that they put Julia in both of those matches, against Tam last month and then in this tag match. Yeah,
I do. I'm worried that the first time that Utami will get to headline an event will be against Julia, when I feel like she will lose it. But no, I mean, on the subject of Utami, she's quietly putting together a really good run of matches, I think, as red belt champion, and this was no different. I thought I've never been, regardless again of all the moral side of things with Bea Priestley, I've never been a huge fan of her in the ring. But I thought this is one of the best matches I've seen from her, certainly, and I think a lot of that was due to Utami, and I think they've got someone who can just put on really good, solid sort of 4.5 star matches with almost anyone. And I think that's it's going unrecognised, I think, how good a run of title matches she's having at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I think probably from Stardom's perspective, what they're seeing is their champion right now, their red belt champion, is someone who can consistently put on 4.5 star matches, but the woman that they're building, their next biggest star, is someone who could put on 7-star matches. And so they're saying that's who we need to put this company behind. Kind of like, it's kind of like what WWF thought about Bret Hart, back when he was a champion. Like, this guy's a solid pair of hands. He'll put on a great match with anyone, but there are bigger stars out there. And so I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do. I'm saying that seems to be what Stardom's thought process is. And my question would be, if you don't think that your main champion, that your biggest champion is the best wrestler in the company, then what does the belt mean? You know what I mean? Like, if you're the UFC heavyweight champion, you are the baddest man on the planet. You are undoubtedly the best that there is. So in wrestling, if that's not the case, if your world champion isn't the baddest man, or in this case, the baddest woman on the planet, why are they the champion? That's, as an outsider, someone who doesn't watch Stardom that much, that's what I thought of when I see the world champion, their biggest champion, not going on last. That was my first thought, is why then is she champion?
Yeah, she deserves to be champion. She's very good. A lot of people would argue that Momo Watanabe should have taken the title off of Iwatani, Mayu Iwatani, and that's hard to dispute. Why they went with a lesser built and lesser experienced wrestler is confusing, but she's very good. Like Utami Hayashishita, it's a hard last name. She's very
Utami
good.
is the easiest.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that I've always noticed about her matches is when she's building to her crescendo, and she didn't do it as much against Priestley, but she hits like grapple and then submission, grapple, submission. Like, it's like she's really ramping it up. She'll hit a big grapple, and then she applies a submission hold, and then as they get out of that, she turns it into a grapple, and then it's really quite good.
And they're quick submission holds as well. It was only 38 seconds across an entire 21-minute match.
They were in this, so there was less submissions from her in this match, but she was keeping up the big grapples. 19 grapples in total, 10-9 in favor of Utami. Quite close match, 52% to Utami, 48% to B. Priestley. I kind of echo Dan. I enjoyed it. I don't see Priestley as a bad wrestler. What I've seen of her in AEW, she was quite good. Obviously, there's the issues around her locker room behavior. The other big match of hers I've seen was against Mayu Iwatani, so it's maybe not a fair judge. Mayu Iwatani should have perhaps joined Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi wrestling broomsticks and 9-year-olds in DDT. She's that good.
Yeah, fair enough. So where there is a big event, actually, before we move on, just still talking about Stardom here, because there is something that I want to ask. I think there are a lot of people out there who are kind of like me. Like, when Stardom has big shows, we know about it, and sometimes we watch them, but without watching every week, being a very casual fan of Stardom, as the promotion continues to grow and more names that even casual fans have heard of begin to join the fray. Like, I've heard of almost every woman in a singles match on this show, which is not something I could have said even looking at a card from last year. As they continue to do that, what do you think is going to be the key for Stardom as they kind of make their way into more Western markets? What do they need to do to really make themselves more known in English-speaking Western markets, or is that something they're even concerned with as you guys are watching?
So I think there's a more immediate issue of building up their support in Japan. I think it's still relatively low. I think they're still the biggest Joshi company in Japan, but compared to even something like All Japan, I think they are way behind in terms of sort of fan involvement, supporter levels, that sort of thing. So I think there's a lot to do in that sense. I don't think they have particular aims at the moment. Well, I'm sure they do. I mean, Rossi is in charge, and they're obviously linked with Bushi Road now. So in bed with New Japan, there obviously will be expansion plans on that front. But I think there's and again, and I'm saying this obviously from a veteran from the heart of Surrey in England rather than in Japan. So, so I'm sure there are people who are much more knowledgeable about this than me. But I think at the moment their main aims are to sort of consolidate in Japan, and there is certainly that element of bringing in people like Julia, Mina Shirakawa from other promotions. They're doing that. They're sort of doing the WWE, bringing in everyone from the other promotions approach. And I think that'll probably be what they do for now. But in terms of what they do going forward, I think they will probably try and tie themselves closer to New Japan. They obviously have, at the moment, they have this every year at Wrestle Kingdom, they have the exhibition match. You've obviously had B. Priestley being involved with actually on TV. It wouldn't surprise me to see more of that happen. Whether that's a good thing or not, I'm really not sure, but we'll see, particularly based on what happened with B. Priestley. But but it was actually quite interesting that B. Priestley is, because at the end of her match, she announced it was her final Stardom match. She's now not going to wrestle for Stardom anymore, which I think was certainly caught most people by surprise. Because I think she felt like, certainly in terms of Western viewing, she felt like almost their most marketable person, which is problematic in itself. But I think the fact that they haven't brought in a lot of Gaijin wrestlers suggests that Western expansion is not their thing at the moment. But they're still trying to put themselves in a strong position in Japan so that when someone is able to expand, it's them.
Interesting.
Yeah. Part of the reason that I like Stardom is it's Japanese wrestling. It's got a Japanese wrestling style. I find it a bit more, it's easier to consume. Like New Japan, when it's good, it's great, but when it's not, it's a big letdown. Stardom matches tend to be shorter, quite often a bit faster paced. It's just differentiation. I don't know. I think there's still space for match quality as well. That's how New Japan came big after all. But I also think that going back to your original question, like why is Utami not at the top of the card? I think they just obviously see Julia as more marketable. She has more star power, they like to say, which I think there's a bit of image involved there. She's, how to put it, she is the kind of person that would get cast in movies and not a soap opera.
So it's
they've got a look in mind at the moment. I think it's the best way, because and this is the thing. A lot of traditional, old school Stardom fans would prefer to see the likes of Momo Watanabe being pushed, and she was second on this card, way down the list. They are there whilst they push the likes of Julia. There is clearly a shift in what they are targeting at the moment in Stardom in terms of, as you said, star power rather than pure wrestling ability. Right. And I think that's gone hand in hand with the Bushiroad involvement. So there certainly is a shift on that. But as Greg says, it's not directly sort of making the matches bad at the moment. Certainly, there's been some superb matches. We haven't talked about the Natsupoi versus Tam Nakano match on this, which was also a superb match, completely different, but a superb match.
Yeah. Which is on the tip of my tongue. I would suggest that if you are somebody that's like looking for an easy way into Stardom, this is a really good match. It's fast paced. It's 18 minutes, so it doesn't go over 20. But it doesn't feel that long. Tam Nakano is turning into like a really magnetic performer. And the statistics behind this are really interesting too. 29% match offense to Tam, 71 to Natsupoi, her opponent. 51 strikes from Tam, 115 from Natsupoi in a 18-minute match. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Wow.
Which I looked at those stats and I was amazed when watched it again. Part of it looked like Natsupoi had just been completely beaten up, and yet she had twice the amount of strikes. It was very, very interesting match. But I think the story was a sort of slightly exactly. It's the power of the strikes rather than the actual
exactly. I think that goes to her ability as a seller. I mean, you can look like you're getting killed when you're really not taking all that much offense. I mean, 90s heels are famous for doing that.
And it
plays
is
into
that's
the story, doesn't it? That because Natsupoi is the high speed champion, so supposedly the sort of the more lucha approach versus Tam, who's the white belt champion, therefore sort of the more mainstream wrestler, I suppose. So that's the point, is that the strikes aren't as hard when they're coming from the high speed champion. And to be fair, some of the kicks and the Tam lays in are quite impressive to watch. I certainly wouldn't want to be on them at all.
Well, it's a big part of that match, isn't it? Like Natsupoi going with like loads and loads of strikes, and there's a great bit of that match actually where Tam kind of goes a bit Kota Ibushi or Ishii. Ishii's maybe a bit more of a good comparison. Like Natsupoi's hitting her with strike after strike after strike, and she just kind of walks right up to her, and then eventually does a really cool kick. And it's a really, I would call it a gateway match. It's really good.
Well, it's really interesting, and to hear from you guys, it kind of sounds like the goal of Stardom here. I mean, they kind of sound like WWF in the 90s, where they have a look, they have a blueprint that they want to go with, and that is going to be who their top stars are comprised of. But you still have a lot of variety that you can get into, even if that's not your thing. If you weren't a fan of the huge muscle heads in WWF, there still was other stuff for you to get into when they were kind of at their prime. And eventually what that leads to is finding characters that become household names. Eventually WWF found The Rock, they found Steve Austin, they found people that are now the biggest stars in wrestling in history. And so if Stardom, it's not a bad way when you're growing to think, you know what, we're going to find our talent that are going to be the biggest stars, and that's who we're going to market. We have an idea of who that's going to be. So in that sense, I guess I wasn't being entirely fair talking about, being confused why the top championship wasn't at the top of the card. Eventually, in 2 years, no one's going to remember this show not being main evented by the red belt, but we may remember, or, hopefully Stardom's idea is in 2 years, everyone's going to know who Julia is. And so no one's going to remember that, the red belt didn't main event this show. So I guess it's all about keeping an open mind on this one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there. And just going back to what Craig was saying about gateway into it, they're about to have a Cinderella tournament as well, where the winner of that will get a shot at whichever belt they want. So if people are thinking about watching Stardom, so it's a really good time to get into it. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, I believe it's 10-minute matches in that tournament, so it's quite fast paced. I haven't seen it. Dan convinced me to watch Stardom around summer last year. I was advised to watch Mayu Iwatani versus Takumi Iroha, and it was an unreal match.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a gateway if I've ever heard one.
Do we want to completely blow off New Japan Pro Wrestling because we are going long and have the briefest of WrestleMania conversations?
That's actually exactly what I was thinking of doing. I think if you listen to our show over the last 2 weeks, generally the thoughts on New Japan and the whole IWGP thing, and I think ultimately there's a lot of debate about should Will Ospreay be the champion, all this kind of stuff. I've made no bones about it. I'm a fan of Will Ospreay. I love what he does in the ring. But ultimately, where it comes down to is New Japan, their first belt on heels, the first title reign tends to be pretty short. Not even just on heels, on most people, tend to be pretty short. So if they're following the pattern, Ospreay may not hold this belt for very long, so there will be more to talk about in the future. I mean, I don't watch New Japan every day. I don't watch it a ton, but that's definitely seems to be my read on how they tend to book new champions.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. The same with Jay White, and Jay White was probably more established than Ospreay is now. The only thing I would say about that show is, rather than just focusing on the Ibushi Ospreay match, tag titles match was actually really good. Kanemaru and Desperado versus Sho and Yo. I would definitely recommend going to watch that one. I thought that was a superb match.
That sounds like a lot of fun to me. So yeah, as Craig said, let's talk a little bit of WrestleMania. I'm sure it would be no surprise to anyone out there that we don't really watch WWE over on Pro Wrestling Musings. That's not something that any of us really enjoy doing.
It's we're a wrestling website.
It's called Pro Wrestling Musings, not Pro Sports Entertainment Musings. So I think Craig kind of started the road to that from the very beginning. So the angle that I want to take here, as people who don't watch WWE the same way as we watch AEW and some of these other companies that we do talk about a lot, even though we don't watch all the time, because we're plugged into the stories of pro wrestling, whether they be on social media or on YouTube or listening to podcasts or whatever the case may be, when you're plugged in, you know what's going on. This year, I don't know much about what's happening in WWE. Like, I have to research to find out what the matches are, what the stories are. Like, I had to remember for a second who the Universal Champion even is, because I thought it was Drew McIntyre when I first thought about it, and I had to remember, no, it's actually Bobby Lashley. Why has this build to WrestleMania been so lackluster? Why is there just no heat going into any of this stuff? We'll start with Dan.
To be very critical of WWE, I think it's because they don't build things very well anymore, and haven't done for a long time. I don't think WrestleMania is I don't think they care as much about it anymore. You know, the Peacock deal is a bigger thing to them than WrestleMania. I don't think that they see pay-per-views as being as important anymore, and that includes WrestleMania. This one's obviously slightly different because you're getting the fans back, but the fans coming in isn't going to be there where they make their money on this. It's still on the on the Peacock deal, or on the, I don't know if anyone even buys pay-per-views anymore, but I think that's where their money is still being made.
Well, the problem,
I just don't see them building things very well anymore. So I do I don't watch the WWE shows, but I read them and I listen to some of the podcasts. The Sasha Banks Bianca Belair match being an example, that feels like such an easy match to build, and it sounds like they've just done everything in their power to make it as sort of 7-year-old psychology as possible.
No, you're misunderstanding. See, what they did was they took the two wrestlers that are going to be fighting against each other, and then they put them in a tag team. So they were like on the same team to see if they could, what's the word that you would use for that? Coexist? Yeah, it's not very good, is it?
It was good. It was good when it was Cena and Michaels. I mean, they did a good job once.
24 years. Yeah, it happened once, didn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's an issue with WWE, and I don't want to be those guys. It's so easy for people who watch AEW to just rag on WWE and just destroy them every chance we get. I understand, and there's a lot of people out there that do that, and for me, shall we pick? Shall we pick like a match or a thing each that we're it might be good on WrestleMania? Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
I don't
know. Dan or Craig, let's start with you. What is a match on either night of WrestleMania that really interests you?
Well, I am going to watch it. It seems to have piqued my interest somehow this year's WrestleMania. I think it's the fans. The fans coming back is actually really exciting. And I think I don't know if WWE are totally happy about that because people are going to get booed that they don't want to get booed. But because I don't watch it anymore, one of my favorites ever, one of everybody's favorites ever, Daniel Bryan is wrestling. So yeah, I'm quite keen to watch Daniel Bryan wrestle for once in a while. So yeah, that match should be interesting. Really interested to see what happens with the change of dynamic going from Roman Reigns versus Edge to Daniel Bryan inserting himself in there again.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced he's going to win it, but yeah, interesting.
Dan, any match that really sticks out to you? One match that you're going to be excited to watch this weekend?
Well, I was just going to say, going back to the start of this, not wanting to sort of rag on WWE from start to finish. Like, if you actually look at the card from top to bottom, Like, there's not many matches on there that I wouldn't want to watch normally. Like, there is so much talent there. Like, this is
true.
nothing on the wrestlers at all. It's purely on the build. The idea you got Roman Reigns versus Daniel Bryan versus Edge, three guys who are all, should really be out of wrestling by rights based on their various histories in the last few years. That's an incredible thing, but it just doesn't sound. I mean, and by all accounts, that's one of the best built ones they've done, and still doesn't feel like they've done that. But in terms of the one that I will watch, it will definitely be Randy Orton versus the Lobster thing, because I can't imagine. No, because I can't imagine that it'd be anything other than very funny. And to be fair, the Cena versus
not positive.
Sorry, the Cena versus Fiend match last year was actually the Firefly Funhouse last year was actually superb. So if
I did really enjoy that.
If they're able to pull off something like that this time, particularly because I really don't like Randy Orton, so if they are able to sort of do a similar sort of pull apart of his character, something like that, then I think that would genuinely be good fun. So that's probably the one I will watch.
Okay, all right.
Fair enough.
Not at all what I was expecting to get as an answer to this. But you know what? I can't argue with any of that. I'm excited to see the Lashley-McIntyre match. I think a lot of people are really, really big fans of Bobby Lashley and have believed that he has deserved to be world champion for a long time, and especially people who are familiar with his TNA, Impact, GCW, whatever the hell they're called, run. He was great there, and it was very much the same. The booking at that time in TNA, Impact, whatever, was horrendous, but Bobby Lashley stood out. And he was champion of everything and all that kind of, everything he did. So a lot of people are huge fans of him, and it really mirrors what he's dealing with now. Crap booking, great wrestler. And adding MVP on, crap booking, great talker. So Lashley has been on the run of his life in WWE. Drew McIntyre is mega over, and he's the one person that WWE has managed to not totally destroy over the last year plus. In terms of their baby faces, because we all know that WWE notoriously cannot build baby faces for the last 20 years. And McIntyre has somehow avoided all that. So we were talking about this before the show, being able to open the show with fans. It's going to be the first, the biggest pop that we've heard since the pandemic began, and it's going to be for Drew McIntyre. To me, that alone gives it the energy that we have been missing in wrestling for a long, long time, over a year now, that we've been missing that electricity in professional wrestling. And I think Drew McIntyre is the perfect guy to get that electricity back, go up against a dominant monster heel in Bobby Lashley. That match actually, I think, is going to be a lot of fun. So I am looking forward to seeing that one.
And Drew McIntyre deserves that pop, as you said. He lost that at Mania last year. He's done so much hard work in the year where there's been no fans at all. He deserves that pop, certainly. And as you said, those two, the talent between them, they can't fail to have a good match, I suspect.
I would expect not. I mean, you'd have to work really, really hard for McIntyre and Lashley to not have a good match.
We have been there, so no. So there's so many talented people on that show. I think it will be a good show, and as you said, actually, the pure presence of fans in itself is a bit of a pull. You just want to watch it. I think, again, we were talking about this before the show. I've seen some of the pictures of the stadium, and they've got the pirate ship all up, and it does look. Whatever else you say about WWE, they know how to put on an event, and I think they will do that side of it very well this weekend.
Yeah, and you know what? It's possible. I mean, we've seen before that we've had really good WrestleManias after really, really poor builds. So, this WWE is about making moments. They're about making memories, things that you will remember going back. So, if McIntyre and Lashley go out there and have a tremendous match and the fans are white hot and McIntyre hits the Claymore and the place just explodes, in 5 years, we may remember that. Are we going to remember the build for it? Are we going to remember that Lashley was in that whole Lana Rusev storyline like a year ago? No, we're not going to remember that. We're going to remember McIntyre's Claymore and the fans explode, and after a year of having no fans, that's what we're going to remember. That's WWE's goal. We can talk for hours about whether or not that should be the goal of a wrestling promotion or whatever the case may be, but it is WWE's goal to create lasting memories, and if they do it, they've accomplished that.
Yep, absolutely. And say that they are very good at creating just those moments, as you said. And I imagine there will be at least sort of 2 or 3 across the weekend that will get them exactly, as you said, what they're looking for.
Yeah. Well, it hurt them last year because that's exactly what they were going for with the McIntyre Lesnar match. Rather, they were going for those memories. And if there were 80,000 fans that see McIntyre hitting 3 consecutive Claymores on Brock Lesnar and they just go nuts, maybe that would have created the memory that they wanted. But with no fans, just in silence watching these guys hit finisher after finisher after finisher, it wasn't that fun. But now they've got a do-over. Do I want them to do that again? No. But to give me a match between 2 big guys that are just going to beat the tar out of each other, that's a memory I don't mind having. So again, if that's what they want to accomplish, I think they can do it with this show.
Makes sense. Yep. I've got nothing that I can add to something so eloquent about WWE, I'm afraid.
I know Craig's just he's going through just making sure, am I going to fire these guys and make sure that they don't write for this website anymore? So
I don't like, no, I'm not. This is what Dan likes to pretend that it's some kind of weird boss employee situation. It's like, I'm kind of just like, I've got this website. Some people sometimes look at it. It's kind of boring doing it as my own. Who wants to come contribute? It's not. Yeah. Oh.
That being said,
harming my overly leftist beliefs.
That being said, Dan did have a pretty good point when he pointed out the discrepancy between my introduction of him and you. So that actually doesn't help make your argument there, because I could say that you told me to say that before the show. You didn't. Craig didn't tell me to say any of that. It's just fun.
Yes.
That's right.
Right.
It's building to our feud in 3 months' time.
and then we'll run it all the way back again several times, a la Young
Exactly.
Bucks.
Look, I'm looking forward to Craig versus Dan in a 2 out of 3 falls Hell in a Cell elimination tag 3 stages of hell match in like a year's time.
But if we're allowed to do that in the UK by then yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Oh my God. All right. Well, that's not the ending of a podcast that we've ever had before, but you know what? That's why we do this every week. So let us know in the comments if you're looking forward to the Dan versus Craig 2 out of 3 falls Hell in a Cell tag team match coming up in a year. No, but seriously, if you're watching on YouTube, let us know what you think of any of the things that we have discussed here. Hopefully you've already been doing that as you're listening, because I always love to see other people's perspective on things. As we've said many times, wrestling is art. Art is subjective. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so it's very possible that you've disagreed with every single thing that we have said on this entire show, and that's totally cool, because as long as you like professional wrestling, then you are in the right place. So thank you so much for listening here to Pro Wrestling Musings. Dan, please tell the people where they can find you.
My Twitter handle is @WrestlingRhymes, because I am also a wrestling poet, because just being a wrestling fan wasn't enough for me being on the fringes of society. I've added a bit of poetry to that as well.
You didn't rhyme once in this show, by the way.
I'm a little
disappointed.
Yeah, well, I'm waiting for the strong poetry podcast that will be coming out.
Craig, where can the people find you, my friend?
I don't like this bit. I don't like plugging myself. So do you know what? I'm going to plug a book. And that's going to be my gimmick. I'm going to be really humble. I'm not going to plug myself so that people are going to think I'm really humble, and in that way I am actually plugging myself, but they won't realize. So go and listen to or read Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. It's the best book that I've ever listened to, but in audio form. It's about like, it's all centered around a black woman's death in America, in jail because of her interactions with a white police officer. It's very timely, but the way that he does it is amazing, and he goes all the way through history as he talks about how people are no good at talking to each other and how judges send people to jail more often when they're hungry and all sorts of wild things like that. Yeah, so go and read that book.
That's not the plug I was expecting, but I suppose you are the creator of Pro Wrestling Musings, so you can do whatever you want, and I will do your job for you when it comes to actually when it comes to plugging the thing that you created. I guess I'll have to take care of that. But go on over to ProWrestlingMusings.com. You can see all of our stats. We've got power rankings. We've got a great new article up from podcast regular Anthony breaking down the entirety of WrestleMania. It is fantastic. He's breaking down all of these different matches that we've seen, match times. I mean, go read this article. It is tremendous, and Anthony puts so much work into it. Yes, exactly. It is. It's tremendous, and we will have a video version coming up soon over on our YouTube channel. That is over at Pro Wrestling Musings on YouTube. If you're already there, thanks for being here. Please subscribe, leave a comment, all that other stuff that I've been telling you to do this entire time. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, then please leave a 5-star rating, leave a great review, or you know what, leave a 5-star rating and leave a terrible review. Just put 5 stars in the thing. That's all I want. That's all I want you to do for me. And, of course, join us next week on Pro Wrestling Musings, where we've got more professional wrestling to talk about. I have been Griff from GA. Go find me over on General Admission Wrestling on YouTube. And go find these guys over wherever, except for Craig. Don't find him because he didn't tell you where to find him. So, thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate you. We'll see you next week. Have a great WrestleMania weekend. Enjoy all the wrestling you watch. We appreciate you.